Hello, and welcome to this session on the future of hydrogen. My name is Melanie Noronha. I'm a senior editor with the Economist Intelligence Unit's Public Policy and Thought Leadership Division, and I'll be your moderator for this session. Now, as the world moves towards decarbonization, exploring various avenues to that end is critical. And there is a role for hydrogen to play. Whether it's for the use of mobility in vehicles or in shipping or for industrial uses. Critically today, 95% of hydrogen is generated from fossil fuels. And for the world to sustainably expand the use of hydrogen as an energy carrier, governments are considering blue hydrogen, which does allow for carbon capture. But more importantly, they're exploring green hydrogen, which is derived from renewable energy sources. There's a push in countries from Norway to Japan to expand the use of hydrogen. And so it's becoming all the more important to ensure that this hydrogen that's generated is green. There are impediments to scalability, in efficiency. So there is a lot of progress that is left to be made, which is why we are discussing this topic today, and particularly at the World Ocean Summit, because there is a growing case for green hydrogen generated from offshore wind energy. There are applications in shipping, and there is innovation in subsea storage of hydrogen. And now, to contribute to this discussion, I am joined by three esteemed panelists who have a wealth of experience in power generation and shipping. And so I'm pleased to introduce you to them today. We have Danielle Lane, who's the head of market development offshore at and the UK at Vatttenfall, a Swedish multinational power company. We have Jakob Steffensen, Head of Innovation and Partnerships at DFDS, that's the Danish International Shipping and Logistics Company. And we have Wendy Franks, Executive Vice President of Strategy and Investment Management at Northland Power, joining us from Canada. Welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Now, over the next 30 minutes or so, I'd like to cover the demand for hydrogen, challenges with expansion, how to move ahead with expansion, and of course, how to foster innovation in this space. So I'll start with the applications of hydrogen, and it'll be great to hear from your experience and to understand where demand from hydrogen comes from and what makes it so attractive. So, Danielle, I'd love to come to you first. Can you tell us a bit more about what makes hydrogen so attractive for companies like Vattenfall, and particularly what applications you're seeing, and perhaps even where it'll be most efficiently used?
Sure. Vatttenfall, as you said, is a utility company. We've been in the energy business for around about 100 years. We've got a vision to be fossil fuel free within a generation, and I think that's where hydrogen starts to come into play. Obviously, the focus has been for some time on decarbonising the electricity system, and as an industry, as the electricity sector has made great strides in that. But of course, if we're to meet the net zero targets for 2050, we need to go beyond just generation, and we need to start, I suppose, reaching industries that aren't just looking at green electricity, but also how they take the carbon out of their industrial processes. So a couple of examples that we've been involved in as an organisation are green steel production, using hydrogen in production of steel, and that's with some partner companies in Sweden, and the project's called Hybrid. But most recently, we've just announced with a joint venture with Preem to do some studies to look at how they can use hydrogen, fossil-free hydrogen, to produce biofuel. And that's going to look at large-scale production of hydrogen, and biofuels from that hydrogen. The thing here is that Preem are targeting around about 5 million cubic meters of biofuel by 2030. And if you can take the carbon out of that production or reduce the carbon, you can save around an estimated 12.5 million tons of carbon dioxide. So that's about 20% of Sweden's total emissions. And that's why it's so exciting. So I think in answer to your question, they're just two examples, but it's industrial processes that we've been looking at, as well as other sectors like transportation. But I think the world is a very exciting and open place at the moment for the question, where can we apply this? There aren't any definite markets, but there's a lot of potential.
Thank you, Danielle. I think you've set the scene really well and talked about maybe its core use, which is industrial processes. But Jakob, I want to turn to you next. Can you tell us a bit more about the role hydrogen plays in shipping? I think particularly in light of the International Maritime Organization's targets that are being set to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Why do you think hydrogen fuel cells make sense for shipping?
I think hydrogen and fuel cells have a huge potential to play when it comes to decarbonizing shipping. My industry, the ships, they use a lot of energy, and of course, like everybody else in society, we can improve the efficiency and thereby reduce emissions. But in order really to make a big dent or to totally decarbonize, we need to replace the fossil fuels with zero carbon fuels, and there hydrogen has a huge potential. It is difficult to store, so where a ship today refuels maybe every month and take a lot of fuel on board. If we are to switch to hydrogen, the ships need to refuel much more frequent. So hydrogen might not be for all future ships, but there are other fuels in the making also, like for instance green ammonia, which is also basically based on the green and sustainable hydrogen. So actually, no matter what future fuel shipping is aiming for in order to decarbonize, no matter which one, we need a lot of sustainable hydrogen.
That's great. And so it sounds like shipping will be a source for large scale demand for hydrogen in the future. I want to also just get Wendy's perspective on this in terms of different types of applications of hydrogen you're seeing, but maybe as Jakob just did as well, maybe start telling me a little bit more about the challenges in expanding those use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as Melanie explained quite well, the decarbonization beyond the grid is what is going to be required to fully decarbonize and achieve the 2050 net zero carbon targets that we have globally. And so what you need to do is you need to think about decarbonization of other industrial processes, for example. So high temperature processes, aggregate processes, chemical processes, etc. So the challenge, one challenge that I see is, how do you get the green hydrogen to the location that is required for the offtake contracts? And what I mean by that is, often you have the green electricity, the green electrons are being generated offshore. For example, offshore wind, and that's a big part of what Northland does. We're a big offshore wind company. And then the load center where you might need the green hydrogen is elsewhere. And so it comes to a really fundamental question about, where do you site the electrolyzer? Do you site the electrolyzer co-located with the source of the green electrons, and then you ship the hydrogen to where you need it? Or do you co-locate the electrolyzer next to the load where you need to use the hydrogen, and you somehow deliver the green electrons to that location? And that's something that my team has spent time thinking about. Now, one of the benefits of offshore wind is that often the big offshore wind projects are located not too far from big energy loads, so big sources of demand for hydrogen, so big industrial parks, for example. And you see this on the coast of the Netherlands and Germany. And so that's why I think, and that's why we're quite excited about hydrogen at Northland, is that we think that the offshore wind dynamic is a really natural solution to one of the challenges around green hydrogen.
That's great. Thank you for raising that, the issue the issue of where an electrolyzer is located. I want to go to Danielle as well. Do you want to build on that a little bit in terms of some of the challenges with using hydrogen?
Yeah, I mean, I think Wendy's made some really valid points there. The question we have to answer first is how scalable can it be? I think we've seen some really good announcements coming through. Ourselves, we are looking at 100 megawatt opportunity with some partners in Moorburg. It would be a scalable electrolyzer that we're looking at as it would be a green energy hub that would actually replace an existing coal facility. And we know that in Hamburg there is demand, as was mentioned, but, and this is the big but, the producing hydrogen from renewable electricity obviously has an energy cost as well. And although we believe that you can, it is worth it, and you can actually go down this route, the questions around how you then get it to the demand, how you store it, and also if you can keep scaling the production are all really technical points that we need to think about. At the moment, I think most companies are considering small onshore production, but we know, for example, the Alpha Ventus project that's being looked at by a number of companies in Germany is how can you produce it offshore. And that would be the idea and the concept of having, I suppose, a platform with electrolyzers on that you then can pipe the hydrogen to shore. Again, we've seen further development in the market where some companies, Siemens Gamesa, one of the big OEMs, turbine manufacturers for offshore wind, are saying, well, maybe you can place the electrolyzer in the turbine itself, and actually you're then dedicating production to actual hydrogen production. All of this, though, is really early days, and I think this is where the challenge is. We know that technologically we can do it. We know there are people interested in buying it, but how are we going to create that market for the green hydrogen? Because obviously one of the big challenges is cost, and how are we then cost competitive with other sources of hydrogen? Not just blue, but existing fossil-based production as well. Because at the end of the day, the value that we're putting on it is the greenness of it, not the actual hydrogen itself, because that's the same. The chemical itself isn't different.
Right. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for raising issues about scalability and energy costs. Jakob, very quickly, do you want to add anything more to that in terms of the challenges of expanding use of hydrogen?
Yeah, the way we go about it here in Denmark is that actually the energy producers and the future energy consumers, the future consumers of hydrogen, green ammonia, and green methanol, we actually spend a lot of time talking together and build this future expectations of when does the different consumers kick in. Enable us to get that scale that is needed in order to get the cost down. And that's also, for instance, why the projects where we're looking at, where, for instance, where Siemens Gamesa is looking into producing the hydrogen in the turbine at the offshore wind turbine. Seems to make so good case because it's cheaper to transport the hydrogen in a pipe than to make these big electrical installations. But we all need to share information and help each other build this common understanding of what are the future demands in order to get the scale that is needed.
Thank you, Jakob. And I mean, that's a perfect segue to my next section that I want to get into about innovation. We've highlighted some of these challenges, but without the innovation, without the support, possibly from governments, it's not going to be possible to overcome some of these challenges. So I want to hear more from you, Jakob, about partnerships. But first, I just want to go to Wendy, and particularly to talk about offshore wind. So, Wendy, what do you think the role of offshore wind will be in terms of the development of the hydrogen market?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think offshore wind could really be a game changer for the development of the hydrogen industry, and here's why. So, right now, one of the biggest costs associated with the hydrogen project, and most of the hydrogen projects today are pilot scale projects, so they're smaller, but a very large part of the overall expense is capex. Now, we forecast over the next 10 years, and other people do as well, that capex is going to come down dramatically. So I've seen estimates, for example, that the capex is going to come down and be 90% lower than what it is today in 10 years' time. And so what does that mean for the overall expense of the project? It means that the cost of actually electricity becomes more pronounced within the overall project economics. And so in order for us to address the cost issue, and in order for green hydrogen to be cost competitive, it needs to come down to about $2 a kilogram by about 2030. And in order to do that, then you're going to need to bring down not just your capex costs, but also your cost of electricity. And how do you bring down your cost of electricity? You look for electrical facilities, generating facilities that are also scaling. And that's what you see happening with offshore wind. So offshore wind has a couple of benefits. One, you have a lower capacity factor, which means per unit of capex, you can get quite a lot of electricity as an output. The other benefit is that you don't have the same siting issues that you have with onshore wind, which means you can have larger projects, and indeed projects are getting larger and larger. And so with this scale advantage, what you see happening then obviously is the cost of electricity is coming down. So we think this is going to be a really important overall supporting driver of the hydrogen industry. The other thing that I would say is that what we're seeing, again, with projects in Northern Europe, is that you have times where you have excess renewable power capacity. And you have times of negative pricing, for example, in the grid. And one of the things that we're thinking about at Northland is, can we use that excess capacity now to support further pilot scale projects, to further develop the technology, to further address some of the key challenges, and to answer some of the big questions that we have? So I sort of bifurcate the role of offshore wind actually into the two segments, that now there's the potential to support pilot projects, and then looking long term, I think that offshore wind could really help drive the sustainability of green hydrogen overall.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. I think what you've said, particularly about cost, is really exciting and could really change the economics of hydrogen. So thank you for explaining that. Jakob, I want to come to you to give you an opportunity to expand a little bit more on partnerships and projects. You know, there's a philosophy around learning by doing. So can you tell us a little bit more about how projects and partnerships play a role in fostering innovation around hydrogen?
Oh, yes. For a lot of the Danish ship owners, we got a big surprise back in 2016. We had asked for some professional help to help us look into if shipping were to deliver our fair share of contributing to society reaching the Paris Agreement goals. Then what decarbonization pathways would we need to look into? And I think a lot of us remember the meeting where we had the report presented, because for the first time we were hearing that okay, we need actually a lot of hydrogen or a lot of ammonia to decarbonize, and we were all sitting there. But the fuel is not available, the engine is not available. How the heck do we store this on board in these huge quantities? There were so many questions. But already now, only relatively few years after, I think we have actually come a very large part of the way. And that has, to a very large degree, been achieved by working closely together with the other companies and research institutions that actually had the insights and the experience that we were really lacking as an industry. So there's been a lot of very positive synergies by all parties involved in these discussions and these projects, and as a result, I'm really amazed by how much we have learned in this very short amount of time. There's great projects coming underway, and I think there's so much optimism that yes, this is difficult, it is expensive, but actually we are starting to believe we can do this.
That's great. You also shared some information earlier about the Highway Seas project as well. So do you have some more examples of projects that you can share with us?
Yeah. There are several hydrogen-related projects. One of the really exciting ones is the one we call the Green Fuels for Denmark. Their energy provider Ørsted and a lot of us consumers are teaming up. It's a DFDS and Maersk as shipping companies, DSV as logistic provider, Scandinavian Airlines and Copenhagen Airport, etc., where we are looking into building this huge electrolysis factory right here in the center of, or not in the center, but in Copenhagen, where we're going to produce chasing 1.3 gigawatt of electrolysis. And it has been, we have learned a lot by discussing and supporting each other in order to materialize that project. Another one is our fuel cell test vessel. Basically, we can see as an industry, we need to learn about fuel cell technologies. Today, it's very easy to buy a main engine, etc. But it's way more difficult if you actually want to replace the main engine with a big fuel cell, and that technology is needed if you're going to run your ship, let's say on hydrogen. So create a test platform where fuel cell manufacturers can come and test their technology in a maritime context, etc. There's a lot of fun stuff going on.
That sounds exciting. Thank you so much, Jakob, for sharing that. Danielle, I want to come to you next. We actually have a question from our audience, and this question's come from Isaac Owosu, who's at the Petroleum Commission of Ghana and the University of Strathclyde. And he asks, how does hydrogen storage and transportation influence the drive towards net zero carbon emissions? And I'm wondering if you'd be able to answer that.
I will certainly try, but I think as we've indicated, this is a very early stage for the concept of green hydrogen production. And we know already that the logistics of large-scale production are going to be somewhat challenging. When we've looked at the opportunity within the UK market, for example, we can see that transportation might be one of the key sectors that we can look at. For example, supplying bus fleets. But there is a limit, because anything outside about 200 kilometers in terms of transportation of the hydrogen to the bus fleet is perhaps losing the benefit that you're getting from the actual hydrogen in the buses. So the question then is not just can you produce at scale, but how are you actually efficiently going to get the production to the site that you want to use it at? Again, as Wendy indicated earlier, offshore wind is potentially a great solution here. It can be located close to centres of demand, although not in all cases. There are wind farms that are some 170 kilometres off the coast of the UK that aren't really going to be close to a centre of demand, but could still play a role in hydrogen production. We know that Denmark are proposing energy islands where not just offshore wind could be connected, but hydrogen could be produced. And then you are looking at pipes to ship it to shore. And that looks then very much like how we used to deal with natural gas. But there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be new infrastructure that's needed in order to deliver a green hydrogen solution. It's probably a very unspecific answer at this point, but this is where the development has to happen.
Thank you, Danielle. I want to go to Wendy to just shift the conversation to the role of the government here. Now, we've seen a strong push from governments in Japan with very specific targets around the cost of hydrogen and efficiency. The EU is setting explicit production targets as well. Even in Canada, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but about 30% of the country's end use of energy will be delivered with hydrogen by 2050. So what role do you think governments have to play in expanding the use of green hydrogen?
Yeah, I think governments play a big role in this. I think there are other things that are needed. But to focus on the government piece of it, what you're seeing globally is many more governments are announcing or are in the works of announcing policy supporting hydrogen. And what generally happens is governments first come up with a decarbonization target for 2050 in many cases. And then what follows that is the hydrogen policy, which is required to achieve the pre-stated target. And so what you saw last year, for example, was both China and South Korea, announcing that they are working on hydrogen policy. And if I'm not mistaken, this represents, it was China and Japan. This represents 30% of global carbon emissions. So having these two countries coming up with this supportive policy is, of course, starting to be a game changer for hydrogen. Now, what needs to follow, of course, is the capital to support that. And what you don't quite see yet with hydrogen is the economics behind the projects. And so what's needed to go hand in hand with that policy, which is great, is also the policy or the economic support. So right now what you see is support in terms of capital. So governments are saying that there are going to be different capital programs to build out these projects. A carbon tax would help quite a bit as well. The carbon taxes that you're seeing in Europe, for example, I don't think are quite high enough. Probably others on the call in this discussion know that better than I do. But from my reading is that the carbon taxes are not quite getting you to a point where the hydrogen would be cost competitive. So I would say, to sum up, the evolution of policy that we're seeing globally is positive, but more is to come and is needed if it's going to go all the way to get the projects to be self-sustaining and to be at the scales that are required.
Thanks, Wendy. I want to go to Danielle with the same question about the role of governments. Do you agree with what Wendy said? Will governments play an important role here?
Yes, very much. I think the really critical part they play is setting that objective. Where do we want to get to as an individual country? And in the case of the EU, they've been explicit in setting out a hydrogen strategy, a green hydrogen strategy. The UK has done the same. It's set a target for, I think it was 5 gigawatts of hydrogen production as a key contributor towards its net zero targets. What does that do and why is it needed? Well, very much it tells companies like Vatttenfall that green hydrogen is something that is worth investing in, and it's pulling in our customers as well, and bringing everyone to the table. It won't just be down to governments. Obviously, companies such as ourselves have a really big role to play here, but understanding what the goalposts are, I think, is really fundamental.
Great, thank you very much. I'm mindful of the time, so I do want to move into our final section and a final question, really, and I'm going to come to all three of you for this. I really want to hear about what your advice is for where power generation companies, other shipping companies, or companies investing in R&D for hydrogen, what should they really focus on? And Jakob, I want to come to you first with that question.
I think it's very important for everybody that are engaged in this to be actually very vocal about their intentions and their hopes and how they would like to be supported and how they can support others, because in this race to decarbonize fast enough, we really need to do it efficiently. And it's just such a efficient way to learn very fast. And at least on the consumer side of hydrogen, I actually don't believe that we are competitors when it comes. It is almost like when it comes to safety, nobody is a competitor when it comes to safety, and we're starting to see the same mechanism kicking in, at least on the consumer side of the renewable fuels. We are all in this together, and we are actually stronger by supporting each other and helping each other. Partnerships. Very important.
Great, absolutely, an emphasis on partnerships. Thank you, Jakob. Wendy, the same question to you about what your advice would be. What should we focus on?
Yeah, I would say from a developer's perspective or an investor's perspective, I think the main thing is to really focus on like the details of the project. And what I mean by that is that I see a lot of projects where the developer has thought through a renewable energy resource, for example, but the transportation of the hydrogen and the offtake is maybe a little bit less clear or less developed. Conversely, I see projects where the offtake and the application is very clear, but it's not evident how the green electrons are going to be delivered to the project. So for me, as I think through these things, it's really always the devil's in the details, and going through every single step along the project development, and then even the operations of the project, the long-term viability of the project, which is so fundamental for investors to making sure that they achieve the return of capital and return on capital. I very much encourage people to sort of poke at each step along the way to make sure that the project is viable.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wendy. And Danielle, I'll come to you finally. Can you tell us what your advice would be?
I think it's really difficult to add anything to the comments that have just been made, but I think the one thing is, I would probably say, is scale. We know from renewables that costs came down when we actually made it scalable and we started to deliver at scale. I think the same opportunity is here. It's something that we need to do at scale.
That's great. Very short and crisp answer. We do have a few more minutes left, so I would just want to invite anybody for any final comments, anything that you think we missed in terms of this discussion. Yes, I can see Jakob raising his hand.
Yeah, regarding scale, that is one of the places where I actually think my industry has a very important role to play. We're looking into one single ship, it be a new build running entirely on green hydrogen, a big ship, and the consumption of such as one ship is equivalent to 15,000 cars running on hydrogen. So it is possible to create some big consumers that could make a difference. And the biggest obstacle to do that is actually the price gap between the black and the green fuels. If that was reduced a little bit, then a lot of ship owners would actually go down this road.
Mm-hmm. Well, based on what Wendy shared with us, yes, Wendy, please, I can see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just said Danielle and Jakob have both made great points. And thank you. I've learned through this session, which is why I was looking forward to this. I would just add, so to me, what's interesting about what's happening now on the scale point and on Jakob's point on partnership, it seems to me that we have this I think interesting inflection point in the industry, in that you're seeing this momentum around the policy. You're seeing capital flowing into the space. I mean, just look at the trading multiples of any publicly traded company involved with hydrogen. They have an open door to raise capital to support further technology development. Just as one example. And then I think you see the evolution of the technology and all parts of the technology. So the electrolyzer, getting the electrolyzer to scale, which is so important to CapEx coming down in cost, and also the supporting infrastructure that's required. So the storage and the transportation, the pipeline. I think it was Danielle maybe who mentioned getting, or Jakob, that the putting the electrolyzer concurrent with the turbines, and the fact that it's actually cheaper to have, I think it's a plastic pipeline even, that goes from the turbine offshore to onshore. So seeing all of these things, like, to me, these three critical things, so the policy, the capital, and the technology coming together is great to see in terms of, as I say, the long-term viability and sustainability of hydrogen. And then the other point that I would make is, to me, taking a big step back when you think about decarbonization, it is such a massive challenge for all of us globally. I don't believe that there's any one silver bullet solution. I think hydrogen will play a big role. I think other things are going to play a big role. And it's very much of a yes and discussion. Yes, and what else can we do?
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think this has been such an enriching discussion. Having such expert voices here today has been very valuable in providing us with an overview of what's going on with hydrogen, how we can expand its use, what challenges we need to overcome. We heard about issues with scale, we heard about issues with energy costs. And what was really exciting for me was that if the cost of CapEx with offshore wind comes down, the economics of hydrogen will change for the better. So that's quite exciting. And I really appreciated Jakob's emphasis again on partnerships, because of course we learn from everybody else's research, and hopefully we can advance this in a collaborative manner. I think finally I would want to emphasize the role of governments. As Danielle said, the importance of setting objectives in advancing this as well. And I think, again, being vocal about the intention to support. All really valuable points made today, which made for a fantastic discussion. I hope the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today and for contributing. And thank you very much to our audience for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next session.